Welcome back to Night School, episode 13, Song of Myself, 1892 version, part 11. And back with me, my esteemed colleague, seemingly every night colleague right now, Mr. Wesley Schantz.
I know. This is kind of what we have been doing for, well, I don't know, about a month now, right? Working on this one because we started with The Raven back in early fall, it felt like, and now middle of our autumn's way. We're about halfway through Old Whitman.
Yeah, I wonder who you want to do next, if you have any ideas on that, because it's starting to get to around that time where that might matter.
Gosh, so many ideas. I would say we should do Dickinson poems, something shorter and something, different, but from a similar time frame as these other two. I think that would be a cool person to read
I think
sometime
that's
soon.
excellent. Yeah, I'm in agreement. Let's do Dickinson next. That'd be great. I think she, or at least in one of my other esteemed colleagues, opinion, who is the American literature teacher at the school I teach at, is that Whitman and Dickinson are essentially, and he threw in some crude adjectives that, I'm sure you could look up a few facts about both of them, and then you could make up your own mind about the jokes you could develop. But he said that Dickinson and Whitman are essentially the father and mother of American poetry. And so that would make sense, especially given the mother imagery we considered last time, to move into that domain next time into Dickinson. I think that's wonderful.
Well, yeah, that's what they say, right? Honor your father and mother. So that's what we're aiming to do here. Well, all right. So 31.
Yes.
31. I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars, and the pismire is equally perfect, and a grain of sand, and the egg of the wren, and the tree toad is a chef d'oeuvre for the highest, and the running blackberry would adorn the parlors of heaven, and the narrowest hinge in my hand puts to scorn all machinery, and the cow crunching with depressed head surpasses any statue, and a mouse is miracle enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. I find I incorporate meese, coal, long-threaded moss, fruits, grains, esculent roots, and am stuccoed with quadrupeds and birds all over, and have distanced what is behind me for good reasons, but call anything back again when I desire it. In vain the speeding or shyness, in vain the plutonic rocks send their old heat against my approach. In vain the mastodon retreats beneath its own powdered bones. In vain objects stand leagues off and assume manifold shapes. In vain the ocean settling in hollows and the great monsters lying low. In vain the buzzard houses herself with the sky. In vain the snake slides through the creepers and logs. In vain the elk takes to the inner passes of the woods. In vain the razor-billed auk sails far north to Labrador. I follow quickly, I ascend to the nest in the fissure of the cliff.
Well, this is one heck of a part, though I would say that the focal point for me remains the first line. I'm awestruck by how beautiful it is. I believe, a statement of faith, a leaf of grass, that which gives the title to the entire work. And so Whitman too recognizes the power of this line is no less than the journey work of the stars. What does that mean? I know it's beautiful, but that it seems to be a return to his universalism, that which is the grass is just as awe-inspiring as that which is the stars, and there's actually a causal relationship between them. It's sort of an Aristotelian point in that respect, and that we as finite beings on earth are sort of like embodied copies of the celestial perfect bodies in heaven. And then he returns to his sort of universalism that he's been doing, right? The tree toad, the sort of Socratic using of regular, everyday things to illustrate great points. It's sort of a Buddhist practice too. What is it that Alan Watts says about the Buddhist master? That he makes of the material metaphysical and of the metaphysical material. So he's a master of making relationships between universals and particular manifestations of them in reality. And so we're getting that here from Whitman. The narrowest hinge in my hand was to scorn all machinery. He's talking about the power of life so often here. Running BlackBerry, the mouse rather, and all of this as opposed to, there's a statue at some point that he talks about, that anything that has been made that is not living is nowhere near as interesting as that which is living. And the most interesting living thing is the thing that is narrating all these experiences, articulating, connecting, joining them together by art. And he throws it in your face. In vain, in vain, in vain. That shows, that bit of anaphora shows conscious repetition and recalls to me, say, Ecclesiastes, which, all that which is beneath the sun is vanity, right? In vain, in vain. Well, actually, I'd like to ask you a question. What do you make of that in vain, that conscious repetition, sort of biblical? Or go on.
No, yeah, I think that as he began with his "I believe," this whole thing is more of an affirmation, and so what's in vain seems to be the way that these things would perhaps escape. Because it seems like the upshot is that last line, I follow quickly, I ascend to the nest in the fissure of the cliff. So he, the poet, the poetic narrator here, can go wherever these things go. They cannot escape him. That's what I take that last stanza to be saying. The opening of it, the first line in 31, the journey work seems to be juxtaposed by the chef d'oeuvre, right? The masterwork. So it's like the journeyman, the apprentice work of the stars, and the masterpiece for the highest, right? Like, again, there's this like tension between what is incomplete or imperfect and what is totally finished and can't be improved upon. And he seems to be, I agree, he seems to be mixing those things again, right? The pismire, that's an old word for an ant. I looked it up. And so the ant, the grain of sand, the egg of the wren, the tree toad, the blackberry, right? All these common things. The simplest, the smallest is equally perfect to the most complex, right? It goes down to minerals, vegetables, and these are, like he says, they're sort of incorporated with him. They're he's a kind of mosaic. He uses stucco, right, of all of these things that, in that sense, I suppose they can never elude him because they're already a part of him, right? And it's a matter, as he puts it, of his desiring. And so it seems like he's kind of got that lustful desire that he was wrestling with. He seems to have gotten it back under control, back in hand here. And he is very much back in his mighty, poet mode in 31 here. It is a very lovely little section of the poem.
Yeah, and I think the last line is beautiful too. And not only for its sense of motion forward, but just the imagery of the nest in the fissure of the cliff. It's like a purely feminine image, right? Not only is the sort of fissure of the cliff sort of the opposite of phallic imagery, sort of vaginal imagery there, with a nest inside of it, also a maternal sort of image, a return back to his idea of the mother and the great mothers that he had figured. And it's interesting that how that is juxtaposed with the imagery of the stars, or like the idea of the heavens in the first in the first line. And I believe it's as if the masculine and the feminine are juxtaposed at the ends of these, and which makes the word in vain all the more interesting for his potential opinion of the feminine characteristic of, say, adornment or something like that. I'm not sure exactly whether he was intending that or not, but I do see that connection between the final line and the first line. What do you make of that?
Oh yeah, I do like the idea that believing and following as those two key verbs, um, the stars and ascending, uh, and the idea that the nest is it's a kind of borderline between a created object and a natural object, right? The ant kind of does that too, because the ant builds its farm, its little nests and ant hills. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. So there's something going on here that seems to be, yeah, blending a little bit of the high and the low, but in a more I don't know, more intentional. It may not be the right word, but a more balanced fashion, certainly.
It,
Um,
he does seem to be pulling out some more advanced poetic tricks
yeah,
in this. Like I do agree that when you say he seems to be returning to his own mastery, his own chef d'oeuvre. And for those of you who don't like that French word, if you just put the word HORS in front of that, that's hors d'oeuvre.
mm-hmm.
That's a helpful word to know, because it's just very difficult when you come upon it if you don't know how to say it. And
It's got too many letters.
a lot of letters. Yeah, the French, But it does seem as if Whitman is less questioning himself and more manifesting his ability as a poet here, while also making explicit in a poetic fashion, but a clear poetic fashion, his, again, universalist principles that, like, all that runs through life is worthy of notice and is thus of interest and worthy of articulation by me.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
think you pointed out last time about this, but the very first image there, the leaf of grass, that is the one he plays on with the idea of the leaves in a book, right? That's sort of that seems to be another one of these points at which he interpenetrates with his subject matter, right? The leaves of grass are turned into the pages of the book.
Yeah.
And that's the title for the work.
So I want to ask you about that. Why a leaf of grass rather than a blade of grass? Is it to make that metaphor explicit, or is that sort of an expression that's fallen away over time?
I don't know how to distinguish the two. It certainly doesn't sound as normal an expression to our ears. I don't know whether it was at the time or not, but it certainly has a less warlike sound to it, doesn't it? A leaf versus a blade.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I'm interested in why it was a leaf of grass, because just the leaf of grass, like a leaf, in a pamphlet or leaf imagery is very close to book imagery. It's pages made of paper, which are also a part of a tree, or from a part of a tree. And the idea, like we've been saying, with this 52 part, sort of 52 weeks out of the year, sort of pastiche of a life thrown together, with this sort of existential focus on the subject and its ability to experience all that is, while still trying to recognize that there's more than what it has seen. That's something maybe I'm waiting for a little more in Whitman, a curiosity for that which he does not know. Because I think we've been getting a lot of what he does know, what he does believe, and what he can do. But I'm a little more, and maybe I just haven't noticed it, but I am interested to see what he thinks is beyond his boundaries, and if he can confront that.
Yeah, well, it's hard to tell sometimes when his questions are rhetorical and when they are, really wondering, and they appear now and then. So it would be an interesting thread to kind of watch for.
Yeah. Well, shall we to 32?
Sure.
I think I could turn and live with animals. They are so placid and self-contained. I stand and look at them long and long. They do not sweat and whine about their condition. They do not lie awake in the dark and weep for their sins. They do not make me sick discussing their duty to God. Not one is dissatisfied. Not one is demented with the mania of owning things. Not one kneels to another, nor to his kind that lived thousands of years ago. Not one is respectable or unhappy over the whole earth. So they show their relations to me, and I accept them. They bring me tokens of myself. They evince them plainly in their possession. I wonder where they get those tokens. Did I pass that way huge times ago and negligently drop them? Myself moving forward, then and now and forever, gathering and showing more, always and with velocity, into infinite and omnigenous, and the like of these among them, not too exclusive toward the reachers of my remembrancers, picking out here one that I love, and now go with him on brotherly terms. A gigantic beauty of a stallion, fresh and responsive to my caresses, head high and the forehead wide between the ears, limbs glossy and supple, tail dusting the ground, eyes full of sparkling wickedness, ears finely cut, flexibly moving, his nostrils dilate as my heels embrace him, his well-built limbs tremble with pleasure as we race around and return. I but use you a minute, then I resign you, stallion. Why do I need your paces when I myself outgallop them? Even as I stand or sit, passing faster than you.
Wonderful. I think this is an example of that point we were just talking about with this question that appears kind of at the turning point of this section 32 here, where he switches over from talking about animals in general, and then he sort of switches to talk to this specific example being the stallion. He takes it for a quick ride around the track. And in that question that he asks, where did they get these tokens? I wonder, did I pass that way huge times ago and negligently drop them? Like, in some sense, he himself is responsible for these reflections that he sees when he looks at them long and long, right? He's devoted this time, this attention to them, and part of it is because they're so different from people, right? There's all these contrasts that he goes into in the second stanza, all the things that they do differently than humans, and they stand in stark contrast in all these sort of satirical ways to the moaning and groaning and sort of, I guess, dogmatic religiosity, I guess, something like that of his fellow men. But then he sees in them something of himself, right? And he wonders where they got it, right? Of course, in some sense, he must be responsible. His passage then kind of becomes this new motif, right? This velocity, and he can't account for it, but he can sort of sense that he's always been in process, like always moving through time. I take that to be like the development of consciousness, of this passion, this desire that he's kind of fixed upon in the last few parts that we've been reading, kind of wrestled with, and now he's kind of got under control, much like the stallion, right? That he brings to use and then to let go, because after all, right, here's definitely a rhetorical question: why do I need your paces when I myself outgallop them, right? So it's not for the stallion's speed, but it's for this kind of kinship between them that he seems to most admire. And I love that line, eyes full of sparkling wickedness. I think he can definitely feel a kindred spirit in the stallion there. I really like that.
Yeah, and there seems to be sort of a nested Phaedrus imagery in there with the Platonic idea of the tripartite soul being a charioteer for the rational intellect, and a noble stallion, white and beautiful, which is the will or the spirit, the thumos, as opposed to the nous. And then there's, of course, the ignoble, poorly behaved ebon stallion that you have to pull the bit on so hard that its gums bleed in order to rein it in to make it work with the spirit. And this seems to be sort of that notion that he's bringing himself under control. And this is the imagery he chooses to suggest, that his period of apprenticeship is over and he is now master, and that he has mastered himself, or the beast within. He has subjected himself as a human animal to the initiation process of becoming poet. And that this is the expression of his mastery of himself in this domain. And I really like that idea because I'm teaching the Purgatorio right now. And the idea that one subjects oneself to sort of the difficulty of suffering through the days in some, endeavor in order to become something new, like a lawyer or a doctor or, a great scholar who spends one's day learning how to do new things. But that at some point one has to produce a work that shows one's what one has learned. And this seems to be him saying that what he has learned from his education is, well, he has learned the self-mastery that is represented by bringing one's passions under self-control and moving all in one direction as a unified whole in order to have a very specific effect in the world. And he seems to be wanting to be American epic poet who presents universal naturalist and deistic themes and, shows the way forward for the next people, or what they should love in the world and in America, and how they could express themselves. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I see that he's I like the idea of the Phaedrus being brought in with the horse image there. I also think that there's a certain amount of gadfly that he's doing in that satirical second, right? Because the horse is also the the city state of Athens, right? That sort of is off to and doing up to no good and needs to be kind of stung into action. It's a little lethargic, right? And that's sort of Socrates' image of himself as the stinger, the gadfly, and that's I think what he's doing a little bit there, in his own laconic way, in the second stanza, which again, just they make him sick. That's some of the strongest negative imagery that we've gotten so far. That, and it's couched in a negative phrase as well. It's what they don't do, but by implication, that's what his fellow men do. When he looks at them, sometimes, and so if there is something that he wonders at, remember a while ago now, it was how there could be anyone so mean, right, or unbelieving or something like that. I forget now the phrase that he used, but that was one of the things he wondered at. And here, the higher he sort of ascends in his poetic mastery and in his own personal evolution, the further, in some ways, it seems like he is from understanding how some of his countrymen have managed to get themselves in such a state. And there's a certain amount of arrogance to that, I guess, but after all, he did work on this poem for like 50 years, so I guess he figured out the way he wanted to say it. So,
well, it's just so interesting because it's for all the beauty he sees in nature in things like ants, he fails to see the beauty in his fellow man in this respect. And it seems to be because he's sort of upset at perhaps what man can be if man takes a more liberal approach to life and, is less bound by morality and is more open to new experience, which seems to be sort of at the root of Whitman's morality, which I think is what makes it difficult for him to come down on one side of a position. But also he just seems to totally dismiss and find past judgment negatively about people who seem to have a doctrinaire belief in a religion, sort of a just simply behavioral and basic articulation level sort of relationship to religion. And that, I mean, even a human that is not particularly impressive to other humans by human standards is still pretty much the most impressive thing ever to have existed anywhere, especially compared to things like a leaf or an ant, or anything else in the world, right? Like, even a disinteresting human is fantastically interesting as a, like a living conscious phenomenon.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think he's being a little tongue in cheek here, and just sort of like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, compared to how great you could be, wink, nudge, like me, the poet, like compared to the promise and the potential of people, it just that's got to be part of what makes him so discouraged when he sees them not living up to it, right? So on the other hand, right, the animals, they don't have that pesky self-awareness, and they're in that respect, so much more immediately appealing to him to kind of behold and wonder at. So yeah, it's an interesting little turn that it takes there.
Yeah, they seem to live out their stories without mistake, sort of being in the Tao. So, shall we finish with 33? I'm just sort of scaling over it right now, and I don't know, Wes, we might need to just, wow.
No, I think that's going to have to wait for next time.
Yeah, oh my gosh, this might be 2 or 3. I'm just still going.
Sure.
Did I miss something? I was laughing about this like several seconds ago. We might need to break this one. My God. Wow. Yeah.
Well, all right. So for next time.
It makes sense that the word Texas would be in the very next line after that.
Yeah. Awesome. We read, a couple sections here tonight, and I guess we'll probably read part of one section next time. So we are doing fine. It's always fun though.
Yeah, I always have a good time doing it. I think it's helpful, good work. And, we're going to keep doing it until we get through it. And this is what we like to do. So keep tuning in, people.
That's right. It's our journey work.
It's our journey work, right? We're hoping to spin out Chef Derv at some point. But, you got to put in the time. So that's what we're doing.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.